Welcome and greetings. Welcome to our final series of the walkthrough of the US Signal OpenCloud environment. This is going to get through what most people are going to end up utilizing the most, which is going to be the compute section. Now, if I go through the dashboard and take a look at compute, you'll notice that there are plenty of sub options available. This is because this gets to set up all your environment for what you want to run for the compute environment to spin up and spin down compute instances. So you can see I have two devices already. Now, these particular devices have already been pre-created running Windows 2019, and you can see that they have IP address associated with them, so that I can easily try to connect to those particular devices should I need to do things like RDP or VNC or something to get to the console. Now, this is where all the instances happen. You'll notice that there is an add instance option up here. Now, let's go ahead and click on that. Now, I need to select what zone I need to build this in. Now, in my particular case, the zone that I've selected has been Lab 01, so I'm going to click on that. Now you can see this gives you the option of all the templates or the ISOs that are available. So if I wanted to build the device based off of a US Signal template, I could follow along here. If I had community templates, they would be listed here. If my own environment, if I had uploaded any sort of images, in this case a template, my particular template would be available in this location. And the same for shared. If somebody is sharing a particular template with you, it's not necessarily with everybody, you would be able to find it under here. So let's go back. I'm going to select the Windows 2019 BIOS template. Now you have an option here of overriding the root disk size. I'm not going to. Now we get into our compute offerings. Think of this kind of similarly to what Amazon and Azure and Google Cloud Platform basically do. They compartmentalize instance offerings into pre-canned bits of CPU and memory. So the same thing applies here. You can see that we've got selected is a 1 CPU at 2.1 gigahertz and 6 gig of memory. I can work my way down to 2 CPUs and 12 gig of memory, 4 CPUs, 24 gig of memory, 8 CPUs, 48 gig of memory, and so on and so forth. But in this case, I'm just going to select the minimal device, which is 1 virtual CPU and 6 gig of memory. I'm not going to override the root disk offering, and you can see it's listed at 100 gig for this particular device. If I needed to add a data disk, I would add that here. So let me go ahead and add a data disk. Now network. I have 3 different networks to choose from. So in this case, you can take a look and see the information as far as the CIDR is concerned. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually select my 3201 VLAN. I have the capability of being able to select different networks and add a virtual NIC for that particular network in question. But in this case, I'm just going to select the one network. So you can see here that it says to please configure the IP address and MAC address. Please select the network as the default network. So I've done that. It's going to automatically choose an IP address based off of that particular CIDR, and it's going to auto-generate a MAC address, which is what I want it to do. SSH key pairs. Well, we're running Windows, and I'm not installing SSH onto Windows, so I'm not going to select any SSH key pair. So I need to now, I'm not going to do any advanced settings, but I am going to go through some of the details that are available down below. Now, name. The name has to be in lowercase and only include dashes and numbers. So that should be good there. Now I've got groups I can add these to. I'm not going to add it to a particular group. Keyboard language, I always select US keyboard. Now you have an option of whether or not to boot the instance or to keep the instance off when you click on this particular button here. So in this case, I'm going to not start the instance, but I am going to create the instance. So our launch instance is a success. You can see it's in a stop state, just like I wanted it to be, because I wanted to be able to select the image and show the different types here. There's a start instance, a stop instance, reboot instance, and destroy instance. So if I wanted to start the instance, I would click on this. If I wanted to start the instance, I would click on this button and start it. If I wanted to stop the instance, it's currently in a stop state, I would click on stopped. Reboot, if it was running, it would force a reboot of that particular device. And destroy instance. Now, I can also click into the instance and get a very good batch of operations that I can perform similar to what was available beforehand. So in this case, I can edit the instance. So if I click on edit, I can decide what group I wanted to put it in, change the operating system, make it dynamically scalable, add some user data information. I'm not going to do that here. Start the instance. So if I click on this, please confirm you want to start the instance and click OK. So now the instance is going to go from a stop state to a started state or a running state. I can stop the instance. I can force it. So instead of waiting for the operating system to shut down gracefully, I can force it and force the device off immediately. So just in case for some reason it's hung, you can't get to the tools that are installed upon it, which you need to have in all of our images, QEMU, QEMU guest tools. That's what's installed on these devices to be able to communicate back and forth with the OpenCloud interface. So you can get some of these bits of information, like what IP address is being used, and so on and so forth. I can reinstall the instance, which forces it to go back fresh to the instance template that you were using. I can attach an ISO. So for instance, if I need to attach any of the ISOs, like I wanted to install SQL 2019, I could attach the ISO. And inside the operating system, now the ISO for SQL 2019, something should be popping up and making it available so that you can run the setup from the ISO. I'm going to detach the ISO. That removes it, so it's no longer part of the operating system. I can change the affinity. I have an anti-affinity rule that I've associated, which we'll get to later, that I can associate with this particular virtual machine or this instance and keep it from another pair of who's using the test affinity group. So say I'm using multiple different devices and I have a cluster and I want to make sure the cluster's not on the same node. So both instances are both not on the same node behind the scenes. I would set an affinity group and ensure that they stayed away from each other. I can set an affinity group, which means they would be together somewhere within, as well as possible, within the environment at the same time. But in this case, I have an anti-affinity rule. I can scale the instance. I can change the type. So very similarly to how you can do this in AWS, you can change your instance type. And if you need to automatically migrate the volume to another storage pool, that's taken care of in here as well. reset the SSH key pair. I can say basically, especially in a Linux device, if I want to reset what SSH key pair that device is using, I can reset that. And I can assign the instance to another account. So in this case, we set up earlier, you can assign to an individual account or to an individual project. So in this case, say for instance, this Windows 2019 device is going to Core IT Infra. Now, if I change the view to Core IT Infra, you can see that now I have that available. So let me change the view back to default. And that is it for the instances. Now let's get into instance snapshots. You can take snapshots by taking a running virtual machine, and you see available here, there's a take instance snapshot and take an instance volume snapshot. So the two are different. Instance will allow you to take the snapshot of what's happening in memory, and the volume is what's happening to the data on the disk. So the instance snapshots stay under compute. Now, if I went and did that, I would basically get a snapshot available to me to revert back to from an instance perspective. Say I'm going to make a change to not necessarily an application, but something that's running, but I don't want to cause any problem if I need to revert back to that particular instance snapshot. I would take a snapshot. Instance volume, so if I was going to make major changes to data, I would then at the same time take an instance volume snapshot so that the data itself is backed up in that particular snapshot. So if I take a look at the snapshots, you can see that I have one available. It's got a name associated with it. It's a disk type. It's currently good in green. I can create a snapshot from the instance snapshot, or I can revert to this particular snapshot. So those are the options that are available. Instance groups. Now, an instance group is just a grouping of different types of virtual machines. So for instance, if I wanted to put these together in a fashion, say similarly to a VApp that you may have seen inside of VMware vCloud Director as an example. This would allow me to take all the virtual machines necessary, or all the compute instances necessary for the application, whether it's a database, middleware, and a front-end device, as an example, a classic 3-tier architecture, and put them all together in an instance group so that they all run together. So it would ensure that you would have all the different VMs put together and make it easy to be able to find those particular devices. So I can take a look and view the instance, so I can see that this test instance group is listed under here, but it's not listed anywhere else. SSH key pairs. So SSH key pairs are unique, especially to anything that's running SSH to operate. In most cases, you'll probably operate this under a Linux device. However, Windows can run OpenSSH, especially later versions. And this allows you to create an SSH key pair instead of having to use a username and password authentication to get to that device. You would basically be able to authenticate to that device utilizing this SSH key. So that's what all this is there to do, is to be able to ensure that you have different keys available for the for the compute instances, and ensure that you've got the key pair that you need to be able to authenticate to that particular device. User data. We register some user data. This basically allows for the cloud init script, that's cloud-init, to be able to operate and run predetermined setup instructions. Now, In this case, this is heavily utilized in Linux, but you may want to be able to do things like automatically create a customized account, as an example. Now, with this user data field, you can put the user data encoded in base 64, that content, and have it auto-create that information that you needed to create. In this case, I'm not going to walk through too much related to this. This is kind of an advanced feature, but if you're running into problems like not being able to log into Linux, you can change some things around here to automatically create an account for you so that you know you always have an account ready to rock and roll for adding to that, to logging into that instance. Affinity groups. I discussed this earlier. I have a test affinity group here. This affinity group, I can select it and delete the affinity group, or I can click in on it and I can get some of the events and information. So you can see that I've got virtual machine ag updates, affinity group updates, the affinity group creates. So I get information as far as what's in the test affinity group. And this allows me to take a look at and see who's separated from who, whether it's an anti-affinity rule or who's paired with who with a affinity rule. So that's the walkthrough of the affinity groups. And with that, that brings us to the end of the US Signal OpenCloud walkthrough. If you need any more information, please hit the US Signal website and follow along with our documentation for this particular environment. And if you need any more information beyond that, feel free to reach out to US Signal, available on LinkedIn, and we'll try to get you the information that you need for following along with this particular brand new cloud and open cloud environment. Thank you.